Welcome to this explainer. All right, let's dive right into this. Today we are unpacking one of the most fascinating contrasts in human history. We're looking at the romantic, legendary origins of Rome and stacking them up against the gritty and honestly way more spectacular archaeological truth. We've all heard the bedtime stories, right? But today we're going to look at the hard evidence. We'll journey from ancient pastoral festivals and a highly debated bronze statue straight into the soil of early Italy to see how an empire was actually born.
So, how did the Roman Empire actually begin? I want you to picture the classic myth in your head right now. You know the one: a deposed king, twin babies cast adrift on the river Tiber, rescued and nursed by this fierce she-wolf, and eventually growing up to found a glorious city on a hill. It's an incredible story, isn't it? Full of divine intervention, rugged survival, and destined greatness. But how much of that is actually real? And honestly, how did the Romans themselves view their own beginnings?
Well, to really understand the myth, we have to look at how the Romans celebrated it. Enter the Paralia. This was an ancient Roman festival held every single year on April 21st. But to the Romans, this wasn't just some random spring festival. No, this was the exact Dies Natalicius, the literal birthday of Rome itself, the day Romulus supposedly marked out the city's boundaries. What's really wild about this festival is the pastoral connection. It honored Pallas, a shepherd deity. The Romans completely embraced the idea that their ancestors were just rugged herdsmen. The earliest rituals here didn't involve grand marble temples or anything like that. They involved shepherds leaping through bonfires made of hay and straw to purify themselves and their flocks. They even used the preserved blood of the October horse, collected months earlier, in their purification fires. It was a super rustic, earthy celebration of their mythical shepherd kings. And honestly, nothing captures that wild, mythic origin better than the Capitoline wolf, or the Lupa Capitolina. If you've ever seen a documentary or even just opened a book about Rome, you know this statue. It's that bronze masterpiece showing a fierce she-wolf suckling the infant twins, Romulus and Remus. For well over a century, this statue has been the ultimate, unquestionable visual symbol of Rome's ancient Etruscan roots. Historians and art experts, they universally agreed it was cast somewhere around 480 to 470 BCE. I mean, it even had its own dedicated room in the Capitoline museums. It was the physical, tangible anchor to that ancient myth. But here is where the story takes a massive turn. For decades, that traditional view held absolutely firm. It was an ancient masterpiece. Case closed. But then, in 2006, an expert conservator named Anna Maria Karuba dropped an absolute bombshell. While restoring the wolf, she analyzed the physical and technical evidence and declared that the Capitoline wolf could not possibly be ancient. Actually, her research indicated it was a medieval product, likely created by Bell founders sometime between the 9th and 13th centuries. And just like that, boom, the physical anchor of the entire Roman founding myth was pulled right out from under us.
Now, you might be thinking, wait, how could they possibly know that just from looking at the metal? Well, it all comes down to the direct lost wax casting process. During the restoration, they inserted a tiny microcamera right into the belly of the wolf, and it revealed exactly how the bronze was poured. The artist modeled a clay core, covered it in wax to sculpt in details, packed the whole thing in earth, melted out the wax, and, here is the absolutely crucial point, poured the molten bronze in one single continuous piece. According to Karuba and other metallurgic experts, ancient sculptors simply did not do this for large-scale statues. Ancient techniques relied on casting parts separately and then meticulously welding them together. Casting a statue of this size in one single pour, that was a technological hallmark of the Middle Ages, specifically used for making massive church bells. As you can imagine, this revelation threw the academic world into absolute chaos. As historians Johannes Fried and Maria Rodnati Alfoldi so perfectly put it, an antique monument falls from her pedestal. The debate raged, people were freaking out. If this famous wolf is actually medieval, what happened to the real ancient symbol of Rome? Well, Rodnati Alfoldi proposed a fascinating, albeit pretty speculative theory. She argues that the original ancient bronze wolf was likely hauled off to Constantinople as plunder, where it met a pretty tragic end, basically melted down by marauding crusaders in the year 1204. So, the wolf we have today, it might just be a medieval echo of a lost ancient reality. Which naturally brings us to a really vital question. If the Capitoline wolf isn't ancient, and the stories of Romulus leaping through bonfires are just romantic myths, what does the actual dirt say? What happens when we push aside the art history and the legends and just look at the hard, scientific data of human settlement in ancient Italy? Let's dig in, literally. To answer that, we turn to the incredible work of archaeologist Alessandro Guidi, who mapped out the real timeline of Italian state formation. It's like a giant puzzle coming together. Around 1000 BC, during the final Bronze Age, we see pre-state villages, just simple, scattered communities. But then a massive, sudden shift happens around 900 BC as we move into the early Iron Age. We see the rapid birth of proto-urban centers. Literally dozens of small villages vanish, and their populations suddenly concentrate into massive new hubs. And by 800 BC, we have mature early states. Now, for a really long time, historians just assumed that Greek or Phoenician colonists must have sailed over and taught the local Italians how to build cities. But Guidi's data proves otherwise. This incredible urbanization was entirely homegrown. It was the local communities themselves driving this massive leap forward. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how that homegrown process played out across early Rome. Instead of one unified, shiny city just popping up out of nowhere, Rome actually formed as a collection of distinct groupings of huts spread out across those famous hills, the Palatine, the Esquiline, and so on. Over decades, and really over centuries, these separate little communities began to slowly expand and organically merge together into a single massive entity. We see this exact same pattern in other massive early centers too, like Tarquinia and Veii. Archaeologists actually call this a leopard-spotted distribution, because when you map out the ancient pottery, you don't find a densely packed urban grid like, say, modern Manhattan. Nope. Instead, you find clusters of huts, the spots on the leopard, separated by large empty spaces. These empty spaces were likely used for farming, or maybe they were dividing lines between distinct tribal territories, which were known in Roman tradition as curiae. So it was definitely a city, but it was a city with plenty of breathing room. There is actually a specific term for this incredible process: Sinoism. It's just a fancy word for the merging of several smaller villages into a single massive proto-urban center. But what's truly fascinating is how these early cities were actually governed. Because they were formed by mashing all these different villages together, they weren't initially ruled by a single, all-powerful king. Instead, they were governed by a heterarchy. Basically, that means a system of shared power among the different tribal elites. And we know this for sure because when archaeologists dig up the earliest graveyards from this period, they're surprisingly egalitarian. The graves don't show massive wealth gaps. Instead, they show leaders carefully masking their power to maintain peace and harmony among the newly united tribes. Now, just to really drive home how significant this was, we have to talk about the staggering scale of these early Italian settlements. By the early Iron Age, Rome wasn't just some little hilltop fort. It covered an estimated 300 hectares. Bologna also reached 300 hectares. Places like Capua and Veii were around 180 hectares. To put that into perspective, those sizes are absolutely enormous for the ancient world. They far, far exceeded the modest little shepherd villages described in the romantic Roman myths. We're talking about urbanization on a truly monumental scale. And with that massive size came immense, undeniable wealth. 15,000, that is the number of bronze objects discovered in just a single archaeological site, the San Francisco Hoard in Bologna. We are talking about 14 quintals of raw bronze wealth. That kind of find completely shatters the whole illusion of simple, humble farmers. These true early states were absolute industrial powerhouses. They were engaging in complex trade, massive manufacturing, and stockpiling wealth on a scale that was completely unprecedented. So, if we take a step back, what does this final, mature phase of the true early state actually look like? Well, by the 8th century BC, these cities were constructing complex stone fortifications and grid-like road systems. That early egalitarian facade completely faded. It led to the rise of fiercely rich warrior elites, guys we might finally start calling the first true kings. They began building grand civic sanctuaries directly over top of those ancient foundational huts, quite literally paving over their pastoral past. And crucially, we see the early spread of writing and the strategic control of vital resources, like setting up monopolies on salt production. It's a gritty, highly structured reality of statecraft, and it is a far cry from the innocent myth of baby twins and a she-wolf. Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought to end our explainer today. We've seen how the legendary Capitolian wolf is, in all likelihood, a medieval creation. We've seen that Rome didn't just spring up in a single day under Romulus, but organically merged over centuries of Sinoicism and complex social evolution. But it really begs the question, are the mythical stories we tell about our origins just as vital to our identity as the archaeological truths we dig out of the ground? The reality of how human civilization built its early states is a fascinating blueprint of survival and absolute ingenuity. But perhaps the romanticism of the myth is what actually gives that civilization its soul. Definitely something to think about. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive.